Welcome to the Better Online Lessons podcast, the purpose of which is to help teachers and students come together to share information, ideas, and experiences in hopes that we can all have better online lessons. My name is Chris, and this week I'm excited to speak with composer, performer, producer, and educator, David Mueller. David, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
Absolutely. I'm excited to talk to you because I know you teach a lot of students, first of all. You're not new to teaching. Are you new to online teaching? Let me ask you that first. When did you start teaching online?
I had never done any online as in video lessons before COVID hit. I had some online services that I'd used that connect to in-person lessons, and they had an online option, but nobody ever seemed interested or, never came up before COVID.
Gotcha. And now we find ourselves here, so many of us.
Yeah, exclusively, and then into the unforeseen future. We don't know how long, we thought this might be. Exactly. I don't know what you thought. Yeah, we thought it might be a couple weeks when it first started, and then now we're looking at maybe a second year.
Well, who knows? But as far as I'm concerned, it's here to stay. The online platform, teaching. I'm sure it's going to be a hybrid from here on out.
Yeah, I told myself I'm not going to commute again, so we'll see if I stick to it. But
yeah, we're spoiled now.
Yeah, no, so, I actually really do enjoy the online lesson format. For some people, it depends on the personality type of the student, but for some people, it's a lot better.
Absolutely. I love it now that I've settled into it, for sure. One reason I was really excited to talk to you is because I know you teach a wide variety of students, age ranges, all sorts of stuff. Prior to COVID, what was the youngest you've taught? What's the oldest you've taught?
So prior to COVID, the youngest I had was a 4-year-old. I started teaching my niece since COVID, and this is in person, so it's not the online thing, but the approach still stays the same. She's 2 years old, so that's exceptionally young. But so before COVID, it was about 4 years old. And then my oldest student, you become too polite to ask, but she was in her 80s, and she was a beginner, so not like starting again. So, and she was able to do it and have fun and play, enough to make her happy. It was kind of neat to watch.
That's awesome. And so as with, teaching in person, there's, I'm sure, a different approach depending on the age and obviously depending on each particular person and personality. But now that you're online, tell us a bit about your youngest, your oldest, and how your approach has changed specifically with the online platform.
So with the younger students, my 5-year-olds now, you always have to tailor a lesson, whether it's in person or online, but it becomes especially important when it's online. And especially when these young people are doing everything online and they're looking at a screen for, literally hours a day, maybe 10 hours a day if they're going to school and then taking a lesson and whatever. But so you have to tailor the lesson to where the person's at the moment, right? If especially with a young person, you're under 10s, if they're not emotionally ready for the way you want to run the lesson, listen to how they want to do stuff. You can always get them to play. You can always get them to do something. Sometimes it's even useful to put down the instrument, right? Like we can review note names and positions and things, or review concepts without the instrument until they're comfortable with the lesson.
That's a really good point. And, in a way, it kind of takes the pressure off of you as a teacher if you put more attention on the student, which is sometimes I get caught up in my own head, like, oh my gosh, am I covering enough during this lesson, et cetera. So
that's what I
really like that approach.
That's one of the realizations that really, I think, was beneficial from moving to online teaching, is it made me reassess, kind of everything about how I was doing it. A lot of times in pre-COVID lessons, I was worried about, is the parent going to be happy with covering X amount in a lesson? What if we only work on one song? Is that, kind of seem ridiculous? And I know those kind of things as a teacher, like I have enough experience to know they're not, but COVID really or teaching online really let me relax and step back and see, okay, how is the student really reacting? What's really going to matter after the lesson? And almost always what matters is the student's experience. Did they learn something that day? Even if they came out of a lesson feeling a little better than going into the lesson, I feel like that's a win.
Absolutely. I love that.
especially with the young people. As far as teaching the older range, it's not so hard. The online doesn't present more of a challenge, except for maybe the tech part. But depending on how much you're willing to do to make this work, like I've done a little bit of help with tech stuff, helping people get their computers online to do like Zoom lessons or to use Kazam to do it in real time.
Yes, and I want to ask you more about Kazam in a bit because I'm very
Yeah.
interested to hear about that. So in regards to the younger students, I found one thing super helpful for me is just parents' involvement. To the extent that the parent's available, what would you recommend, if anything, if a parent's not necessarily available at the moment their child's taking their lesson? How do you interact with the parent then after or before?
I think it's important to set up before you even go into lessons with somebody young enough. I think below the age of 6, it's completely appropriate to do a trial lesson. Not everyone's attention span is appropriate for music lessons at whatever age. But I think it's important to talk to the parents beforehand, that when the student is very young, part of the expectation is that the parent kind of learn a little bit of the instrument too. I mean, at least enough to not teach them, but you have to get them started at practice at home, right? You can't just say, okay, do what your teacher told you. Well, what did you do in the lesson, right? If the parent's not there, they don't know that. And every time I've had a student, that's funny, we're talking about age range differences, because I've had a couple student parent duos take together, and every time it's the parent who starts a little better, and then the child just rockets past them.
That is fun to watch. Yeah.
It's fun to watch, and the parents don't mind. They're happy their child's progressing. But I think the critical part of that success is that the person's in the lesson with their parent. In fact, I do a weekly. This student took since she was 5. She's 10 now, and she started with her dad. Now her dad plays a little bit of piano and sings and plays really well, and he's a good player, and he's progressing too. But she's kind of gone past him in the reading and the scale knowledge and stuff. But I think critical to that success was that when we started, they were together. He could help me solve like little emotional things I didn't know, or re-explain things in words that, like, maybe I'm using one word she doesn't know, and he knows that kind of stuff is invaluable in saving time and making the child comfortable.
Absolutely. There are times with in-person lessons where I sometimes prefer that the parent actually step out of the room for a bit, because the child will act differently depending. If they know mom
definitely.
or dad's right over their shoulder taking care of everything, they don't have to step up as much. Right. But I haven't found that to be the case with online. I've almost always preferred the parent at least be nearby in some way.
Yeah, definitely. That's been, I guess, I never set a hard and fast rule, but that's the rule that ended up happening, is that anybody, kind of below 10 was with their parents. The parents were in the room. And you're right too, because before in-person lessons, I had a very young student, 5 or 6, who, it wasn't a successful set of lessons, but one of the problems was his mother was in the room with the 2 or 3 siblings, and that was enough of a distraction, enough of a behavior change for him, that it didn't. I feel like sometimes, well, actually, I feel like all the time you have to make lesson time its own thing.
It's got to be a different dynamic.
Yeah, that so like teaching. Well, to finish the story about the parents, so I feel like he was just too relaxed, and it was not formal enough almost. So even though he was younger, if I had to do that over again, I would ask, probably ask her to stay for the first couple, but then, to let him see what he does on his own.
Right on. I've also considered recording the lessons, and I've recorded a few of them and put them on YouTube, but I kind of want to recommend to some of the parents of my younger students, like, record every lesson all the way through, watch it back this week as you go to practice. Have you done any of that?
I have, and I had a little bit of experience before that. So I had a student, this was a teenager, and she kind of attended the lesson with her aunt, and her aunt was blind. And the only reason they attended the lesson together was because the aunt and the other aunt came together to the buoy town center every week. So she just sat in the room, but the blind aunt would record, because I'm sure she's used to doing that all the time, right? You know, on her iPhone, she would record the lesson, but it ended up being really helpful to reference back to, you know, how did I word something? You know, was she getting it? The student were they getting it at the time? You know, going back and reviewing your teaching can be really helpful, whether it's from the perspective of the teacher or the perspective of the student or the parent to help the student. Definitely.
Absolutely.
I would like to start recording actually most of my lessons. That's of course something you have to talk to the parents about. You can't. You have to make sure that they know that, and then what your, you know, to your intention is with it to make it better, make your teaching better, or just share with them.
That is a fantastic disclaimer, by the way.
Yeah,
most of my students' parents are fine with it. I've had a couple say, "I'd actually rather you didn't," you know, for whatever reason. Maybe they feel the room's a mess or whatever. It's up to them, and I say no problem at all.
That's complete. Yeah, that's always fine with me. And you know, I teach lessons through Broadneck High School, which is the first time that's been online, of course, you know. And you know, one of the things, since the kids are basically taking the lesson in their room, I say, you know, you can have your camera off whenever you want, right? Like you don't feel like you know, and you're not babysitting kids when they're taking a lesson at the high school level. So it works out really well. They feel like they have the availability to turn it off and be private when they want to, or if they want to turn it on and get like help with positioning or something like that.
Yeah, I like that. It's all about them feeling comfortable and really being able to get into what they're doing. And I tell the parents of my students, you know, if you want to log in on a second device, you can turn your camera off, turn your mic off, and just listen in. You know, it's really opened up a lot of cool opportunities, I think.
It's interesting you say that too about turning the recording off, because actually that student today that started with her dad, so one of the things that she has difficulty with is sometimes anxiety starting a song, and especially, you know, in the music store, at the, you know, when I was teaching at Severna Park Music and Arts, there's other people there listening, there's the parent in the room, so there's reason, you know, there's the anxiety is understandable, but it continued even into the online. So today, you know, I told her, I turned off my video and moved to like didn't shut down the app, but hid it or whatever, so I wasn't seeing her, and I told her I'm just going to listen, and it made her comfortable enough to play through the whole song and sing it.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
And that wouldn't have been possible in person.
No, it wouldn't have been, especially if there's people milling around the store. And, you know, if I, yeah, I have turned my chair and stuff to not watch students before. That's been helpful. But yeah,
I'll do subtle things like I'll ask my student to practice something, and then I'll just turn around for a second like I'm going to get something from my bag, even if I'm not really, but just to take the pressure off enough that they can actually just practice it.
Yeah. And you made a point about making the person comfortable. That's true, and that's especially true for those extremes of ages. So when I'm teaching, example, teaching my 2-year-old niece, we were doing ukulele lessons, and a lesson can be, you know, 10 to 15 minutes of basically play. You know, it's not play, because we're going to take it seriously as a lesson, but we're going to learn string numbers and string names. But what I'm not going to do is sit her in a little chair and say, here's what you got to do. Here's the first page of the book. You know, these are quarter notes. Like, that's not going to work. You have to make a connection with the student. And usually, I mean, sometimes you have to butt heads, but that's usually when they're in that middle range of ages. You have to bring them to you and to make that connection. Both of you have to be comfortable.
Right on.
Right, so,
right on. Do you amp up your personality online at all, or what's your strategy there?
It depends on who you're teaching. So some yes, you have to for some students, or they'll get bored. You know, or you know, I have a little 7-year-old guitar student, a little boy. He's got a twin brother, and they're very hyper, very, very smart, very quick. And with them, I do have to be, or with him, I don't teach his brother, but I do have to be inflate my personality and grab his attention, almost like a cartoon character. But if I did that with some of my other students, it would literally scare them. You know.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. We're competing with YouTube if you think about it, because kids watch YouTube all the. I mean, I watch YouTube all the time, but kids even more so. And if you watch it, if a kid watches a YouTube video and they're not hooked in the first 10 seconds, they're gonna click on the next video.
Yeah.
Well, that's pressure. We got to keep up with that pacing. So.
So that student was challenging to me in the beginning of COVID to keep his attention focused. So we developed a lot of different strategies, and this is stuff I had done before somewhat and built upon, because none of this came out of nowhere, obviously, right? But like we would do a spelling game where I'd give them a word that you could spell with the musical alphabet, and then he has to, and sometimes the challenge isn't even spelling. Sometimes I'll give them the word and how to spell it, right? But it's about finding the notes on the guitar. But for whatever reason, that's enough of a game, that it doesn't feel like a lesson to them. And you can do, like he had a lot of fun. He hated naming notes, but if you called the notes apple, banana, cat, dog, elephant, he was having so much fun, and he's learning just as well, but he's not bored and you're not condescending to him.
Yeah.
Which is, kind of the issue when you have a really smart young person, is you can't put them through your factory and you can't,
And you said it earlier, it really depends on the personality on the student. Like, and like when I try to amp up myself, with a particular student, I'm real careful not to be cheesy about it. Like I have to be my goofy self because I got to do it in my own authentic way. If it's not authentic, the kids are going to know it instantly, and it's not going to work.
So I have some experience teaching autistic students, more so experience than I think the other people that do this job. I don't have any certification or specialization in it, but that's exactly the kind of thing we're talking about, right? Like you can't. My normal thing is I say, "Do you want to play example 7?" And then the student will say, "Oh yeah, sure." If you ask a severely autistic person, "Do you want to play example 7?" They'll just say no. Right. So you have to learn how to rephrase things to meet them on their level, whatever that level is. And in this case, it's just social, because they're just as smart as any other, student you're bringing in. But you have to say, "I want you to play example 7." And then they'll do it and they're happy to do it. But if you give them the literal choice, "Do you want to?" They're not inclined to do it. So they'll just say no. It's almost a beautiful, it's a beautiful honesty.
Fair enough. Yeah. So you got to be very careful with your word choice, which I think honestly applies to anyone online, especially if the connection's not so great. You have to be very clear, to the point.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not about, social skills. Like, in that case, it can be something as simple as using too much jargon. Like I have a student, probably my oldest student now is middle-aged. I later 50s, I think. But we can learn anything and do anything, but if I start teaching her while using all the music theory jargon, she completely gets confused immediately. But if we go through the same lesson and I'm careful not to say fancy music theory terms that I know or whatever, she completely gets it. But she does shut down if you overload them. So you have to make that connection, you always have to meet the person.
That's really great. What advice would you have for parents of younger students if they're not sure whether their child's ready for online lessons?
So if you're really not sure they're ready for online lessons, I think the first question is, right now during COVID lockdown, are they being overloaded with online? Because I think there's a separate criteria for, are you ready for lessons? But if they're doing online school, doing online dance class, doing online scout meetings, this might not be the time to start a 5-year-old on piano lessons. But if they're doing fine with that, if they do fine with normal school online, and they do fine with whatever activities are online, sure, at it. And then I think in that case, it's just a matter of normal lesson criteria. Can the student, one of my first criteria is, do they know the first 7 letters of the alphabet? Like if you can say those 4 words, we have a place to start. If they don't have the attention span to do that, come back in a year, And I think the online thing The only difference that it makes is maybe makes it a little more difficult to start a very young student. So, you know, if they're able to do the lesson requirements, can they sit and behave for a half hour and enough that the lesson works? Can they say the first 7 letters of the alphabet? You know, maybe the online ad's just a little bit of a challenge that you might want to reconsider if they are struggling with it. But I think, you know, I was always willing to do kind of trial lessons for young people. I hate to advertise that, but, you know, I think it's completely appropriate because people don't want to sink, certainly not a month's worth of lessons for that kind of money. But I think it's, you know, helpful to do sometimes 2 weeks in a row to really figure out if this is going to stick and if it's going to work for whatever age and whatever format, whether it's online or in person.
Yeah, that's huge. That's more important now than ever, I would say, is just seeing if you click, especially over the internet.
Yeah, and since there, you know, if you're thinking in the future that there's no, your local music teacher doesn't have to be local anymore. Mm-hmm. Well, all of a sudden, you know, there's a whole lot of more people to sort through and meet.
Yeah,
so
absolutely. Do you have any advice for an older student who's not really as comfortable with, you know, maybe he doesn't watch YouTube or is not as comfortable with the internet even? How would you reassure somebody if they're not sure about online lessons?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is the thing I tell anybody of any age: do it. You know, I have you know, older people who come to me, or, you know, even parents of students who say, "Oh, I wanted to play," or "Oh, I used to play and I stopped." And I think sometimes they give themselves a list of excuses to why they can't do it before they even try. You know, some people will say, "Oh, I didn't start when I was 5, so I could never be, you know, a virtuoso." It's like, well, did you really want to be? You know what I mean? Like, and you can always pick it up and have fun. So I would say for an older beginner who's considering online lessons, I'd say do it. It's as easy as it can be, as easy as a FaceTime call, like with your grandkids or whatever. And you modify the music lesson to, you know, we take turns, we refer back to like handouts and materials, we do recordings, which is really important. That's something that part of our conversation brought up to my head earlier, is the importance of doing recordings outside of the lesson. So one of the things I have to do to keep my talented students who could trick me into thinking they practice during a week, right? They could do that by practicing in one day. Yeah. For those type of students, to encourage them to practice, I have them send me, you know, little performances. So I'll give them a list of stuff for the week and say, you know, maybe do this, and send me 3 little videos of a scale, a chord progression, and a song.
I'm going to have to ask you later how you managed to do that, because none of my students seem to want to send me a recording.
The parents, it's a group text with the parents. That's exactly how I do it. Yes.
There you go. Smart.
Yeah. Well, cool. part of it's, you know, that's always the hardest thing, is how do you actually you can't make somebody practice, right?
Right.
And you can encourage, you can lead a horse to water. How do you make it drink, kind of thing? But there's ways, you know, so you have to inspire people, which is easier said than done.
Yeah. I was thinking about this recently in terms of adult students, because it's like, well, okay, with the kids, at least, if I know their parents are paying for it, I can kind of crack down on them a little bit and be like, hey, you should really be practicing, yada, yada. But with the adult student, it's like, you're the one paying for it. I'm not going to be a drill sergeant, you know? So how can I inspire someone? So that's a really interesting topic right there.
I think it's important to, what you said, like, so I even have a phrase that I say, like, I never admonish the adult students too much, because they're just going to stop lessons. I usually end up saying that to the student as a joke, but part of it's true. I mean, you know, we have ideals about what we're doing, you know, as a music teacher, you're bettering people or whatever. But for some people, this is their release. And if they didn't practice all week, you know, if they didn't practice all month and they want to come in and take, you know, a lesson once a week for a half hour, I'm happy to work through songs like that. You know, I'm not going to shame them for having a full-time job, taking care of kids, and then trying to practice.
I think that's the way to be.
I would hate to have that person stop because they had a busy month and then, you know, not, you know.
Yeah, because people feel guilty about it. No need to add to that. You know, I'd rather inspire with positivity than with negativity, I guess. So,
And
and I think
one of
that's the new way. Most other teachers I talk to are of the same mindset, as opposed to the old
yeah,
model, which is crack the whip.
you're right. I like to call it the Russian piano teacher method, But I was just blanking on what I was going to say.
No worries. I wanted to ask you about your materials, because you mentioned that you use a lot of materials for your students. What kind of materials do you use? How do you distribute them? How do you require that they print? Like if it's a PDF, you want them to print that out? Tell me about that.
So the material started creating these mostly because I was tired of rewriting the same thing, and then you rewrite the same document by hand a couple times for chords in the key of C or whatever, and it gets pretty old, and you get pretty tired of looking at after 3 months looking at the sheet that the student beat up and you made mistakes on or whatever. So part of that was just collecting over time the materials that I ended up rewriting. So I ended up going like setting time every week where no, it's not a lesson time I'm getting paid for, but the pay ends up coming in dividends later. The lessons go so much quicker. So I set aside a little bit of time every week to create these resources, these handouts, whatever they might be on. It depends what instrument you're teaching too, which makes things more difficult. But then also another thing is that they kind of solicit themselves, right? So if I have a student who's working on, for example, I had a student working on Feliz Navidad for Christmas time. So now I made during her lesson a sheet on the computer with the chord diagram software for all the jazz chords in the song that she didn't know. So now I have that for whenever I teach somebody that song again, or if I want to teach somebody, the difference between a D major 7, D7, and D6 chord. I have a sheet for that, so that you can reuse this stuff.
That's really smart. Do you have a way? How do you send these PDFs and these sheets to your students?
You did ask that, yeah. So it depends on the student, like everything else, right? So most of the time it's single. Whatever we're working on is what I want them to print out and to keep referring back to. And then we can slowly start building the library of stuff that I give them by having worked on it. Mm-hmm. I had an older adult student start actually after COVID. And I think I overwhelmed him by like an onslaught of documents. Right? Like I can give that to a high school student, just a zip file full of everything that I ever have, and they'll look through it over the next 3 weeks and probably master it all. But just to give him that, it was just too much, and so it depends on the student. Usually one thing at a time, and I do like to have them print it, because just you can't do online lessons and refer back to the tiny screen you're taking the lesson on, right?
Yeah. Unless they have a second device, if they're on their computer. Thank you, because I've sort of, this is the kind of stuff that interests me. All right, these little details. I'm like, how do other teachers do it? I want to know.
Yeah.
So I made a Google Drive folder that I shared with all of my students, and I'm worried now. See, in my mind at the time, I was like, oh, this is convenient. It's a one-stop shop. They always know where to go to get it. But now I'm like, okay, well, they might have lost the link, or maybe it's overwhelming. Right. They got to go in and find the document. Maybe I should be sending individual documents.
Did they ever look in the first place, too? Yeah. So it's all about the student. Like when I was in high school, if my teacher had sent me something like that, I would look at everything. Like I would just out of curiosity, I would look at every file in the folder. Yeah. But I understand both sides, too. I mean, you have to realize kind of how broad of a role a music teacher plays, right? You're training the youngest young people, and you're a therapist to the older people. And so,
I love it.
Yeah.
Let me take just a moment, if you don't mind, to check in with the chat. I apologize for my rudeness, you guys. We actually have quite a few folks in the chat today. And I'm going to have to lean in close to my screen because it's not the clearest monitor in the world.
CRT.
Yeah. Jeff Alder, how are you, man? Thank you for joining us. Finney, that's one of my students right there. Thank you for joining us, Finney, as always. Finney asks, how much do you charge? I'm not sure if he's talking to me or to you, David, but Finney, I'll tell you to just reach out to us directly for that one. I think he was joking anyway. Matthew Poven, great episode and great guest. Right on. Thank you.
That's my buddy from high school, Matthew Pugan. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for
Nice to see
popping
you,
in,
man.
Matthew.
He also teaches tablas and sitar. I actually more sitar now, but he teaches like Indian classical, voice, sitar, and the drums are called tablas.
Oh, that's awesome. That's
Yeah.
really cool. Matthew, if you want to leave your information in the chat in case anyone else is looking for those lessons, that'd be awesome. Drummer Daddy-O, how are you? Thanks for jumping in. He says, I agree, very informative. This is definitely gives me some things to chew on for my own online teaching. Thanks, Chris and David. Absolutely. Glad you're here. He said, meet and greets are a way to suss out whether or not a student's going to work. Yeah, totally. You know, and it's as much, I think, a personality match as anything.
I think the meet and greets are also really helpful to suss out if the parents are serious, which is helpful.
Yeah, good call. Good call. So awesome. Thanks, guys, for joining us. And if you're watching this later and you have any thoughts on the matter, if you have any questions or ideas of your own, if you have some answers to some of my questions here, please drop it in the comments and let us know. So I think that's all the questions I had in terms of how do you hand out your materials. Yeah, so any challenges I've been having are presumably the same ones that you've come across, it seems.
I think one more thing that can be helpful too is memorizing and editing those materials. Right. So if something doesn't work on them, you can come back and fix it. And you know, you don't have to replace anybody's old copy. There's usually just small mistakes, but then how well you know the material can be really helpful. You know.
In terms of just like moving smoothly through the lesson?
Yeah, like for example, I have a 2-page sheet of chord progressions in like whatever key you can play in open position in guitar, right? So it's 2 full sheets of just line after line of chord progression. But after teaching from it for 3 years, I know that A major is the beginning of the second page. So I can say first line of the second page. It's just like memorizing. I don't remember how many method books I have basically memorized because I just play them all the time. Right, I've played these simple examples in the guitar book and in the mandolin book, and you just start to memorize even where page numbers
and it makes the lessons go that much more smoothly. Yeah, I get what you're saying.
Yeah.
And again, that's so crucial with the online format. You got to keep people's attention, etc. So that's really cool.
You can also sell the materials.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's a good point. Let me ask you, earlier you mentioned Jam Kazam. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
So Jam Kazam is a real-time music performance client. So there's a couple of them now, and they work to differing degrees, but Jam Kazam's worked really well, and it's free. I know in January they're starting to do a subscription model where you could pay, I don't know the details of it, but you could like do 2 paid plans and then they still have the free plan. I think that's for their teachers and stuff to develop it. Like the teachers would get the subscription plan, and that lets them get support and helps Jam Kazam develop it. But what it is it lets you play in real time, right? Which is one of the biggest challenges I faced, especially in the beginning transition to online lesson, is how do you even demonstrate rhythm when you can't clap with a student? Well, there's all kinds of ways, right? But if you use a client like Jam Kazam, you don't have to worry about it. It's essentially like you're in the same room. I had a small temp job setting up AACC's, Anne Arundel County Community College's ensembles on Jam Kazam. So we had the orchestra playing Jam Kazam.
That's amazing. How many people is that, roughly?
Well, so I'm glad you asked that, because we had to do sectionals because there's a limit. Like, I guess it depends on everyone's internet, everyone's computer, but we found an operational limit of like 12 people connect. But that's still pretty, that's going to cover any band that, I've ever been in. So, we could split the orchestra basically into 2, rehearse the strings and everybody else, or whatever. It happens to be a small orchestra for the semester, but
that's
and
amazing.
the jazz band.
Is there a compromise in the audio quality?
Not really. Depending how well it's set up, no, it is not. So for example, I do my lessons from my home studio designed by Chris Johnson, designed and manufactured. Yeah, I know, it's beautiful.
Happy to help.
But so like on my end, the audio sounds amazing. Um, Now, of course, if you're in a noisy room or, someone has a TV on in the other room, there's all kinds of weird stuff that we're not thinking about. That's not a technical fault of the platform, but yeah, so there are weird things that sneak in. But as far as the way it works, I was blown away. I was actually
Awesome.
kind of creeped out because it's almost like in the same room with you talking in your ear.
Yeah.
So it was a little eerie sensation the first time.
I'd love to know how it works. Is it easy to use so far?
It is pretty easy to use. And the only problem I run into is people, because I like I said, I had the job helping people set it up. It's just basic computer stuff that they didn't know how to do. It wasn't anything to do with Jam Kazam. So it's updating your drivers, updating Windows, learning how to install an app versus running it from the web, because you could do either. But I think that if the teaching, if music education industry is going to go forward with exclusively online or even half and half or whatever, it's critical to have a platform that you can play in real time. And I know there's other ones, but I think it's definitely worthwhile to check out. And you have to do these workarounds where you're recording and stuff like that.
I mean, that is the big problem with online music lessons, right? Is the no real time. So I definitely want to try out Jam Kazam, and I'm sure it's only going to get easier from here on out.
Video component too, so you can do the whole thing through it.
Oh, Jam Kazam does video as well.
Yeah, and you can have it. Yeah.
Oh, I just noticed the comment from Bobby Bobson. Where do you see online instruction going post-pandemic? Let me ask you that, David.
I think it's just going to explode, Bob. I think it's just going to get bigger. And I think we've gotten so used to it that now people are comfortable with it. And they're comfortable with the idea of taking a music lesson from somebody 50 miles away that they're never going to meet. And I think that that's going to seep out of, it's already pretty well established in music. And I think that's just going to go to everything.
I couldn't agree more. And I've had the luxury now of having some students that have started with me since the lockdown and all started, and they're not new to Zoom. They're comfortable with it. So it's like, whereas, in March, February, when it all first hit, everyone was stressed. Everyone was, panicking or whatever, overwhelmed. Now it's like some people are like, oh yeah, Zoom, no problem. Cool. Let's do this. And there's no longer that learning curve or that first few lessons of sorting things out. So
yeah. And there's a lot less of an excuse to miss a lesson
yes,
when it's in your house.
That's right. So really good thing. I'm all about looking for the silver linings, and I definitely see a lot of silver linings in the online platform. I'm happy to continue online lessons in the future for those that don't live near me, or even if some students want to do online most of the time and just see me every month. Like, I think these are all viable options.
Definitely. I think it depends again on the needs of the student, right? Do they need to have an in-person sesh where they are complaining about, their parents or their job or their whatever, that could be a different thing.
Yep. Oh, Drummer Daddy-O asks, how do you spell Jam Kazam?
Jamkazam. It's a fortunate name, I think. It's a little wordy, and people ask me questions like that, so I'm just gonna call it JK for short.
There you go. Fair enough.
Just gonna JK roll with it.
All right.
I knew there was a reason you brought the drum kit to the interview.
How often do I have the drums right in front of me for those moments?
Well, it would make a Letterman interview go by so much faster. That and the time machine that I would need to watch a Letterman interview.
Nice.
Good thing we're on the YouTube.
That's right. For those of you, if you're listening and not watching, I have all of David's contact information on the screen here. If you're just listening and you don't see it, however, you can contact David Mueller on Facebook at David Mueller Music. That's DavidMueller Music. Also on Instagram, DG Mueller Music. And your website, which is davidmuellermusic.com.
Yep.
Awesome.
Thank you very much. I look forward to seeing you guys online. I'm hoping to kind of transition from teaching to performing in the new year. Not that I'm going to cut out teaching, but so any lessons, anybody who wants lessons or keep up with me as an artist, check it out on Facebook.
Yeah, please reach out to David. We never even mentioned what instruments you don't play. Are there any instruments you? What are the main instruments you teach? And
so
give us a rundown.
The main instruments I teach, because I play a couple instruments and I'm not comfortable teaching, right? Because I just started. So, but I teach guitar, bass, upright bass, mandolin, ukulele, piano, drum kit, and banjo. Those are my main ones.
That's awesome.
Just started violin. I got a violin like 2 months ago, so I'm hoping to be teaching that in a couple of months. But I want to make sure that I'm really good on it first.
Nice. Well, I happen to know a good teacher if you need somebody.
That's true. Yeah.
You're set up to teach all these instruments in person once the pandemic clears?
I am, yeah. I'm set up to teach. I teach out of Glen Burnie, at Fox Trace, the neighborhood in Glen Burnie. It's my parents' home, has my teaching studio in it. And I'm happy to continue online for anything anybody wants to do. Ear training and composition too.
Awesome. That's great. Oh, here's a question from Elle. I missed this one. Sorry. Are 30-minute lessons enough time? What do you think?
That's a great question. Generally, no. I don't think so. It can be. Before COVID, I thought it was perfect. But when I feel like the hustle and bustle stopped of having to rush around and commute 2 hours every day, and this is for everybody, not just me. I feel like a half-hour lesson didn't become enough. So one of the things that I did was I gave some of my students the option. The students that work hard and the students that are doing, putting in the practice, I'll give them the option of extra 10 minutes when I have it.
That's cool.
And that just makes the lesson go smoother. I'm less stressed about, I hate finishing a lesson because the clock is approaching 0:00, you know what I mean?
It always happens when you're in the middle of a breakthrough with the student too.
Right. Yes, it does. Exactly. So I think, half-hour lessons are great. It's certainly a great way for a young person to start. Any more than half-hour lessons overwhelming. But an hour can be appropriate depending on, how it's all about how much the student practices for that.
Yeah. I found that to be the same. If a student takes advantage of that 30-minute lesson, and by that I mean they practice throughout the week so that when they show up, they can demonstrate the material you've already covered and then move on to new material, then I think 30 minutes is enough. But if it's the type of student that practices once a week during that lesson, then maybe 30 minutes isn't quite enough, So in that case, I would say, depending on the person, if they're up for an hour could be great. I personally love hour lessons if the student's on top of their stuff. 45s can be nice, but they're hard to schedule throughout the day.
It is. So one of the things that I did, because the teaching obviously dropped from, I had like 85 students a week pre-COVID, which sounds a little crazy to anybody who does a teaching schedule, but it was a little crazy. I was driving myself nuts working too much, but I schedule them every hour. And I do a half-hour lesson, and then if they want to take that optional 10 minutes or whatever, they could take it. And now I'm ultra relaxed all the time. I'm not, running around a store like trying to find some kid that's in the bathroom or hiding to trick me behind a bookshelf. I do miss those days, but
yeah.
Everything has its silver linings, I guess.
Yeah. Now, instead of having to unpack an instrument in the first 5 minutes of a lesson, you just have to wait for Zoom to connect for a minute or two.
Yeah, that's true too. And tuning, I don't know how many minutes I collectively wasted tuning beginners guitars that now they don't waste that time. They have a solid half-hour lesson.
Nice.
At the minimum.
Not to mention when the lesson's over, they're already sitting in their practice space with their instrument in their hands. And they can.
That's one of that comes pretty full circle too to one of the things we talked about earlier, which is the videos. I've left a couple lessons where I'm like, okay, we're about to start this song, but we ran out of time because the student was talking about something else or whatever. But I'm like, look, you're already here. You have the instrument in your hand and you're tuned and you're warmed up. Why don't you record yourself playing this and send it to me after, the lesson? Nothing I have to do to stick around, but it just takes me however long it takes me to watch the thing to check it. So
that is a great idea, and I'm going to write that down right away.
There you go.
Because I already got their camera pointed right at them too.
It's like golden tip.
Yes, that's the one right there. I hope y'all are watching till the end because that was that was pretty epic. All right. Is there anything that we haven't covered?
Nothing that I want to talk about. I mean, I feel like your podcast has been pretty helpful to me, actually. I learned technical stuff about Zoom and OBS. I found Nikki's podcast to be really insightful, just the way she thinks about students emotionally, that I'm just too analytical. So
Right
nothing
on.
more than that. And check out Sunday Drum Day, right?
There you go. Yes.
I'll be there every week.
Right on, dude. I love seeing you there. This podcast has just been so helpful for me because I tend to think one kind of way. I have my strengths, I have my weaknesses, and so just getting to hear from other teachers has just been so insightful. And so you dropped a lot of knowledge bombs on us today. I want to thank you for that, and for your time.
Happy to have the conversation.
Yeah, man. All right. Well, hey, thank you again for your time, your experience, your information.
Yeah,
Guys,
man,
join us again next week.
Us.
Absolutely. I'm going to drop some more OBS. We're going to do an OBS deep dive into the settings next week, so that'll be fun. So, David Mueller, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
Definitely. Thanks for watching, guys. Y'all have a good one.